Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so gardening season is really kicking off, right?
Absolutely. You can feel it in the air.
Yeah, so we thought it's the perfect time to zero in on something really fundamental. We're talking soil.
The foundation of everything in the garden.
Exactly, but not just dirt, right? We mean that rich, living stuff that makes for a great garden and, nutrient-packed food.
Precisely. We're actually taking a deep dive into a chapter from Sam Coffman's new book, Survival Gardening.
Oh, interesting. What's his take?
Well, he puts it really simply. If you want your garden to thrive, it absolutely starts with nutrient-rich, living soil.
Living soil? Okay.
Yeah, and what's kind of eye-opening is how he talks about the state of our soil here in the U.S. After decades of things like monocropping and just pouring on NPK fertilizers.
Right, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, the standard stuff.
The standard stuff. But Kaufman argues these methods, while maybe boosting yield short-term, they've actually done some real damage to the soil's long-term health. It's like we've been focusing only on feeding the plants directly.
Yeah, bypassing the middleman, so to speak.
Exactly. And we've neglected the very thing that makes soil truly productive, that living component.
Okay, let's unpack this living component. What are we talking about here? Microbes, worms?
All of the above. Think bacteria, fungi, nematodes, earthworms. It's this whole underground ecosystem. Kaufman breaks down healthy soil composition. Roughly 25% water, 25% air, 45% mineral bits.
Okay.
And just 5% is this living soil.
Only 5%. Wow.
Seems tiny, right? But he stresses that this 5% is the absolute powerhouse. It's what actually unlocks nutrients for the plants. It's what determines the nutrient density of the food we grow.
So that little fraction is the key difference between, say, a watery tomato and a really flavorful, nutritious one.
That's a huge part of it, yeah. It really makes you rethink just chucking chemical fertilizers on, doesn't it?
It really does.
And Kaufman connects the decline in this living soil, partly due to that monocropping and heavy fertilization, to why, maybe the fruits and veggies in the supermarket aren't always as packed with nutrients as they perhaps used to be.
That makes sense. We're essentially disrupting, maybe even starving, the little guys doing the actual work underground.
You got it. We're disrupting that delicate balance.
Oh.
But, and this is the exciting part Kaufman really emphasizes.
Okay.
We can reverse this. We can bring our soil back to life using pretty simple low-input methods.
Okay, I like the sound of low input.
Me too.
Yeah.
And a cornerstone of that, according to him, is composting. Turning our waste into, garden treasure.
Right, composting. So many people think of it just for, reducing trash, which is great, of course.
Yes, it is great.
But it sounds like it's way more critical for actual soil health.
Right.
Kaufman calls it nature's fertilizer, even black gold.
Black gold, yeah. Because that's what it is, really. At its heart, composting is just speeding up nature's own recycling system.
How does that work exactly? What's happening inside a compost pile?
Well, you're basically creating the perfect home for beneficial microorganisms. You give them a mix of organic stuff, air, moisture, a bit of warmth. And this tiny workforce gets busy breaking everything down into this stable, super nutrient-rich substance, the compost.
Like feeding a microscopic army to create fertilizer for you.
That's a good way to think about it. And Kaufman points out, it's actually pretty easy to get started. Plus, you're keeping stuff out of landfills. Win-win.
Okay, but it's not just tossing apple cores and leaves in a heap, is it? Kaufman mentioned temperature being important. Why is that?
Yes, temperature. It's like a gauge for how busy your microbial workforce is.
Okay.
Different microbes like different temperatures to get things really breaking down fast. And also to kill off things like weed seeds or potential plant diseases, you want the pile to heat up. Get into that thermophilic range, warm to hot.
Thermophilic. Got it.
And that's where understanding the whole greens and browns thing comes in.
Yeah.
It's key for managing that heat.
Right, the greens and browns. I've heard those terms. Kaufman explains them, right? Nitrogen versus carbon.
Exactly. So think of greens as your nitrogen source. They're the activators. They fuel the microbes, help generate that heat.
Okay, examples. Like kitchen scraps.
Yep, fruit and veggie peels, coffee grounds are great. Fresh grass clippings, even manure if you have access to it. Bone meal works too.
Gotcha. And the browns.
Browns are your carbon source. Carbon is like the energy food for the microbes. Plus, browns add structure, bulk. They keep the pile from getting too dense and allow air to circulate.
So they prevent it from becoming a slimy mess.
Pretty much. Examples are dried leaves, straw, dried grass, shredded cardboard, sawdust, wood flakes, things like that.
Okay, greens for heat and food, browns for energy and structure. Makes sense. Coffman mentions a ratio, doesn't he? Something like 1 part green to 3 parts brown.
Yeah, that's a common rule of thumb, about 1 part greens to 3 parts browns by volume. It's a good starting point from those situations.
Why that specific mix, roughly?
Well, it usually provides enough nitrogen to get things cooking, heat things there, but also enough carbon to keep the microbes fed long-term and maintain that airy structure. Too much green, and it can get slimy and smelly.
Yeah.
Too much brown, and it might just sit there. Decomposition will be really slow.
Right. Prevents it going anaerobic stinky.
Exactly. That volume ratio is just a practical way to aim for the right carbon to nitrogen balance without needing a science lab.
Okay, practical. I like that. So we've got our ingredients sorted. Where do we actually build this compost pile or bin? Location matters.
It does, yeah. An open pile gives you flexibility, sun, shade, part sun. But you do need to manage moisture more, especially in full sun.
Okay.
Enclosed bins, Coffman suggests, often do better out of intense direct sun because it helps keep the temperature a bit more stable. But the absolute key, no matter the setup, is good drainage. You don't want it waterlogged.
Right. Soggy compost is bad news. What about size? Does it need to be huge?
He recommends aiming for at least a cubic yard if possible. So 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, roughly.
Yep.
Bigger piles hold heat better, which helps speed things up, especially if you're going for that hot composting method.
And containment to keep it neat. Pallets. Bins.
Lots of options. You could just fence off an area with wooden pallets.
Yeah.
Great for aeration, actually. Or use wooden bins, metal bins, plastic totes.
Any pros and cons?
Well, wood insulates pretty well, helping with temperature stability. Plastic is convenient, but might get too hot in direct sun or too cold in winter without some insulation. Coffman also mentions that direct contact with the ground isn't essential, but it can help because microbes and worms from the soil can migrate in.
Oh, interesting. Free labor.
Basically. And whatever you use, make sure there's airflow. Aeration holes are vital for oxygen, keeping it aerobic and preventing smells. Those pellet bins are naturally pretty airy.
And pests. Rodents for open piles.
Yeah, that can be a consideration for open piles. Keeping meat and dairy out helps. Covering the pile can deter them too. Some people use hardware cloth around the base.
Good tip. Okay, so we have the spot, the container. Coffman talks about layering, right? Greens and browns.
Yeah, think lasagna. You alternate layers of greens and browns, helps distribute everything evenly.
Makes sense?
And he also suggests adding a shovel full of good garden soil or some finished compost when you start.
Why's that?
It inoculates the pile. It introduces all those beneficial bacteria and fungi right away. Kind of kickstarts the process with an experienced crew.
Like adding sourdough starter.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
And throughout the process, just keep an eye on moisture. You want it damp like a wrung out sponge, but definitely not soaking wet.
Got it. Okay, now let's get into the different methods. Coffman mentions hot composting first. We touched on the heat. What else is involved?
Hot composting is the more active approach. You're really managing it.
Right.
Monitoring temperature is key, aiming for that 140 to 160 Fahrenheit range, ideally.
Do you need a special thermometer?
They sell compost thermometers, which are helpful. But with experience, you can kind of tell. If it's barely warm, it's likely dead, needs more greens, more nitrogen. If it's steaming like crazy and smells like ammonia, it's probably too hot, too much green. You'd add more browns, more carbon to balance it out.
And turning. You mentioned turning.
Crucial for hot composting. Turning mixes everything up, introduces oxygen throughout the pile, and helps keep the temperature more even. You do it regularly, maybe every week or two, depending on how fast it's cooking.
How do you know when it's finally ready? When is it black gold?
The main sign is that the temperature doesn't spike anymore after you turn it. It's cooled down. And visually, it'll look dark, crumbly, smell earthy like good soil. That lovely humus.
Okay, so that's the active, faster way. Then there's cold composting. Coffman calls it the set it and forget it approach.
Huh. Yeah, that's pretty accurate. Cold composting is much simpler. You basically just pile up your organic stuff as you get it. Maybe cover it to keep some moisture in and deter pests.
Less focus on the green-brown ratio or turning?
Much less focus. You're just letting decomposition happen slowly, naturally. It takes a lot longer, maybe 6 months to a year or more.
And the downside, besides time?
It might not get hot enough to reliably kill weed seeds or plant pathogens. But hey, it's super low effort.
True. Okay, then there's bokashi. That sounds different. Anaerobic. And it handles meat and dairy.
Yeah, bokashi is fascinating. It's a fermentation process, happens without oxygen, in a special airtight bucket.
How does that work?
You layer your food scraps, including meat, bones, dairy, oily stuff, things you normally wouldn't compost with a special inoculated bran. It's got beneficial microbes, mainly lactic acid bacteria.
Like making yogurt or sauerkraut?
Kind of. It essentially pickles the food waste.
Yeah.
It doesn't break it down into soil, but it pre-processes it. You also drain off a liquid, a tea, which you can dilute and use as fertilizer carefully, or even pour down drains.
So what do you do with the pickled stuff?
Once the bucket's full and it's fermented for a couple of weeks, you either bury the fermented matter directly in your garden where it breaks down super fast, or you can add it to your regular compost pile to finish decomposing.
Interesting way to handle those tricky wastes. Okay, let's move on to worms. Vermicomposting. Coffman seems really keen on this.
Oh yeah, he definitely highlights the benefits. And for good reason. Worm composting uses specific types of worms to digest organic waste.
And they produce?
Vermicast, which is basically worm manure or castings. And this stuff is incredible. It's packed with nutrients, beneficial microbes. Coffman calls it worm gold.
Worm gold. I like it. What makes it so good for the soil?
It does amazing things. Improves soil structure, especially in heavy clay, boosts aeration, water retention, increases nutrient availability for plants, can even help balance pH. It's just fantastic stuff for soil health.
So you don't need huge amounts. He mentions just 5% by volume making a difference.
Absolutely. Even a small amount mixed into your soil or potting mix could give plants a real boost. You apparently get diminishing returns once you go above maybe 40% or so, but that initial addition is really impactful.
And it sounds like a continuous supply if you keep the worms happy.
Exactly. It's a living system producing fertilizer for you.
Do you need a complicated setup? Coffman mentions just adding worms to a regular compost pile.
You can definitely do that, and they'll help things along. But for dedicated vermicomposting, there are specific systems.
Like what?
You can use simple bins like plastic totes with drainage holes. Just need bedding, food, and worms. Then there are stackable systems.
How do those work?
They usually have multiple trays with holes in the bottom. You start feeding in the lowest tray. As it fills, you add the next tray on top with fresh bedding and food. The worms migrate upwards, following the food, leaving the finished castings behind in the lower trays.
Oh, clever. Makes harvesting easier.
It does. You can even DIY stackable systems with buckets. Then there are flow-through bins where you add material at the top and harvest finished castings from a door at the bottom.
More continuous.
Right. And he also mentions worm beds or towers, basically integrating a worm composting system directly into your garden bed, like a pipe buried partway with holes.
Delivering the goodness right where it's needed. Okay, but not just any worm will do, right? Not the regular earthworms from the garden.
Correct. You need specific species that thrive in confinement and love eating kitchen scraps. The most common, and Coffman recommends them, are red wigglers.
Red wigglers. Why them?
That they're hardy, reproduce quickly, and are just voracious eaters of organic matter. Perfect for the job. Other options exist too, like European night crawlers or African night crawlers.
Where do you get these special worms?
You can often order them online, find them at garden centers, or sometimes even bait shops.
Okay, so you've got your bin and your worms. What do they live in? The bedding.
Yeah, the bedding is crucial. It's their home base. Needs to hold moisture, allow airflow, be soft, and have a neutral-ish pH.
What materials work?
Lots of things. Shredded newspaper or cardboard is common. Coconut core is excellent. Straw, aged leaves, peat moss, even wood chips can work. Coffman mentions a mix of straw and shredded paper bags being good.
How do you prepare it?
Just moisten it well again, like a damp sponge, not soaking. He also suggests mixing in a bit of garden dirt, maybe some peat moss and finished compost to add grit microbes.
And then just add the worms.
Yeah. Gently place them on top of the bedding. They don't like light, so cover them with a layer of damp newspaper or burlap, and then put the lid on the bin. Keep them in a temperature range they like, ideally between 55 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit.
Okay, they're settled in. What's on the menu? What do red wigglers eat?
They love most fruit and vegetable scraps. Break the food into smaller pieces first. Coffee grounds, tea bags, crushed eggshells are great too. Even natural fibers like cotton or hair.
What should you avoid feeding them?
Definitely avoid meat, grease, dairy. Too much citrus isn't great. Same with lots of onions or garlic. No dog or cat manure, and obviously no plastics, chemicals, or heavily salted spice foods.
And don't overfeed them.
Right. Start small. See how quickly they consume it before adding more. Maybe bury the food in a couple of spots rather than spreading it all over. Less of an issue in worm towers, though, where they regulate themselves more.
Makes sense. So how do you know when the worm gold, the vermicast, is ready to harvest?
You'll see a transformation. Most of the original bedding and food will be gone, replaced by dark, crumbly, soil-like castings. It'll look and smell earthy.
Less recognizable food scraps.
Exactly. If you still see a lot of undigested stuff, just wait longer. When you harvest, you can gently sift the material. Try to separate the worms, maybe push the finished stuff to one side, and add fresh food bedding to the other to lure them over.
Be gentle with the workforce.
Definitely.
And using the finished vermicast, how do you apply it?
So many ways. Mix it into potting soil, top dress around plants, gently rake it into the top few inches of garden beds, add a scoop when planting seedlings. You can even make a worm tea by steeping it in aerated water and using that as a liquid feed.
Versatile stuff. Okay, one last method Coffman mentions briefly, black soldier fly larvae, or BSFL. These aren't worms, right?
Nope, they're fly larvae, but don't let that put you off. They're composting powerhouses.
Oh.
They eat an incredible amount of organic waste very, very quickly. And they can handle things like meat and dairy even better than bokashi sometimes. Plus, they actually help control housefly populations. The adult flies are harmless, don't bite or spread disease, and barely eat.
Really? What are the benefits for soil?
Their castings, called frass, are also a fantastic fertilizer, rich in nutrients like NPK. They're easy to breed in the right conditions, reproduce fast, and pretty low maintenance in a compost system.
Any downsides?
Temperature is a big one. They thrive in warmer temps like 80-90 Fahrenheit. They won't survive cold winters outdoors. So maybe better suited for warmer climates or potentially in greenhouses year-round.
And they can handle stuff like pet waste or humaner in the right setup?
Yes, they're known for being able to process those more challenging wastes safely, especially in enclosed systems designed for them. They generate a lot of heat themselves, actually.
Interesting. How do you even get started with them?
You can attract the adult flies to lay eggs using things like milk smeared on cardboard near your compost. They love nitrogen-rich stuff, maybe less keen on high-carbon things like paper compared to worms.
And they can even feed chickens.
Yeah. They have a stage where they crawl or to pupate. You can design systems with ramps, like angled PVC pipes, so they literally crawl out of the composter and into a bucket, or directly to chickens or fish. Self-harvesting protein.
Wow, that's efficient. Okay, so lots of options there for building soil fertility beyond just NPK.
Absolutely. That's really Coffman's core message in this chapter.
Right.
Move beyond just feeding the plant and start focusing on feeding the soil. Nurture that biological richness, that 5% living component.
Through composting, vermicomposting, maybe even BSFL.
Exactly. It's about creating a resilient, sustainable system that works with nature.
So as everyone's getting their hands dirty this gardening season, what's the final thought we should leave them with?
I think it's really about seeing the connection. Your soil's health, the nutrient density of your food, and your own health. They're all linked, aren't they?
Deeply interconnected.
Yeah, so maybe think about actively nurturing your soil, even in a small way, as a direct investment in all three. Pick one method, maybe simple cold composting, maybe a small worm bin, and just start. See what happens. Observe the difference it makes in your garden, maybe even in how your food tastes.
It's the journey, right? And every bit of compost you make is a step toward healthier soil.